Hey folks, Brent Matusik here, and today we're going to be exploring the differences and similarities between the Octave Mandolin and the Irish Bouzouki. But first, let's listen to a demo of the two instruments side by side.
Different faces, but inside we are same, but different, but still same.
For the purpose of this test, I tried to eliminate as many variables as possible. For one, the Octave Mandolin and the Irish Bouzouki both have a spruce top. They were both recorded with a Rode NT1A microphone with no post EQ, and I used a Dunlop 1.14mm triangle pick for both of them. Between the two instruments, I found that the Irish Bouzouki definitely had a lot more attack to it, and the Octave Mandolin definitely had more punch and low end. But don't take my word for it, let's take a look at the EQ curve comparison. Right off the bat, one point of interest that sticks out to me is the peak that you see for the Octave Mandolin around, let's say, about 170 Hz, give or take. So right there you're noticing quite a bit more low end and punch coming out of it. Another point of interest lies in the upper mid-range. You'll notice from 1K to about the 5K mark that the Octave Mandolin has more mid-range overall. This would explain why the Octave Mandolin has a more full sound compared to the Bouzouki's snappier attack. Another thing to consider is that this particular Octave Mandolin has a round sound hole instead of F-holes. F-holes generally will create a punchier sound and a little more top end, versus a round sound hole is going to accentuate the bass frequency and give a smoother top end. But that being said, the fact that we're still noticing differences in the curve between these two does show that there are some more differences at play than merely the sound hole construction. Which leads us into the next difference between these two instruments, the scale length. Irish Bouzouki's are typically quite a bit longer than your Octave Mandolin. Irish Bouzouki scale length, which is defined as the distance between the nut and the bridge, and that applies to any string instruments, not just Bouzouki's, but typically you'll see them to be around 25 inches all the way up to 27 inches. This particular one being 26 inches. For the Octave Mandolins, they're going to be quite a bit shorter, so you're going to be noticing them around 20 to 23 inches, give or take. This particular one is 22.5. So why does that matter? Well, for one, the fret spacing on the Irish Bouzouki is going to be longer than the Octave Mandolin, meaning you will have to stretch your fingers further to play this guy. Depending on the size of your hands, this may be something to consider. As well, even though these instruments have very similar tuning, which we will go over later, the longer scale length of the Bouzouki allows you to use much thinner strings to achieve the optimal tension for that tuning. The thinner string gauge on the Bouzouki is going to give you more attack and snappiness, versus the thicker strings are going to give you more bass frequency and more punch, which is exactly what we saw in the EQ curve. Moving right along, another key difference is the top construction of these instruments. Irish Bouzouki's, much like their Greek Bouzouki counterparts, utilize flat tops, versus Octave Mandolins traditionally will have arch tops. You may run into some exceptions to the rule though. I have seen some Irish Bouzouki's that have arch tops, and vice versa, I've seen some Octave Mandolins with flat tops. Through my research, I did find quite a bit of contradictory information as to what specifically the construction of the top is going to do to the tone of the instrument. I did see a fair bit of testimonials saying that flat tops generally excel at rhythm playing and for volume, versus arch tops traditionally will produce more of a full tone that's more suited for lead work, but that's all very subjective, and there's a lot more factors that go into the overall tone of the instrument. Just as an example, the wood type's gonna have a massive influence on the tone, your technique is gonna have an influence, the kind of pick you're using. So these are all factors to keep in mind if you're looking to buy one of these. And lastly, the tuning is different between these two. Standard Irish Bouzouki tuning is G-D-A-D, versus on the Octave Mandolin, it's G-D-A-E. Eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed in the reel that I played before that while the fingering was very similar between the two instruments, I did have to change the fretting on that bottom course. Exactly 2 fret difference between the two, and that's to compensate for the D tuning versus E tuning. Where it becomes more complicated is when you're playing drone notes or chords. Even though I tried my best to keep the chord voicings the same between the two instruments, you'll notice in the demo that I had to change up the chords. It's because some of the voicings you just physically cannot reach because of the tuning differences. This is going to affect how you play as well as how you compose music, and that's very much reflected in players who write with either instrument. In conclusion, there are some differences between the two instruments. I personally have to give the win to the Bouzouki. I just find I prefer the tonality of this, I prefer the feel. The longer scale length just feels a lot better. I do have pretty big hands. But more importantly, what did you prefer? There is no right or wrong answer with it, it's just what suits you best for your creative endeavors. And that wraps it up for today. I hope you guys found that video informative. If you guys like what I do, please consider liking, subscribing, and checking the link below for my music and social media. Take care!